What's up, YouTube, and welcome to Codename Scream. I am that horror guy, and please make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications for all things horror. Before we get into today's episode, we're going to go ahead and clear the air on a whole handful of things that some of you may or may not have missed. First off, sorry, last week was just no content. Some of you had reached out and made sure everything was okay. We're getting prepared for the transition of things here on the channel. So for those of you that did not get to join us on the Slashathon live finale, first off, we had some unfortunate kinks in the system on this side to where we couldn't go live on our channel here. So thankfully, the Codename Reaction guys were so generous to lend us their channel with the live capabilities to go there. So thank you again for Goat and Sky for not only being the guest that I was already lined up to have, but to let me commandeer your channel on top of your studio space. So we did that. So apologies there. There was a lot of miscommunication there. I would try to reach out as quickly as I could through social media with my own personal Facebook, Instagram, pretty much every avenue. For those of you that did not get to join us with that, Michael Myers was voted to win Slashathon. And it was a close call there for a minute. There were a lot of votes going towards Leatherface. Another announcement that we made that night is, if you guys remember Mel, she was part of my coverage of the zombie remakes for Halloween 1 and 2 on With That Being Said, as well as stood in as a co-host for the Richard Ramirez versus Michael Myers episode of Slashathon. We had a lot of messages from you and people that were friends throughout the industry with music, horror, you name it. Between the two of us, we got a ton of messages talking about how they enjoyed our discussions about the films and just our being together. So with that being said, we are going to bring her on full-time as my co-host. So Mel will be joining me starting next week. One other caveat that I threw in there right at the end was Leatherface made it from episode 1, my very first episode of this channel, and as the Slashathon series, as it were. He made it from that episode all the way to the finale. That is a Cinderella story at best, and you can't really bat an eye at that at the end of the day. So what I went ahead and decided to do for everyone was those that were batting for him in that live and even throughout this entire thing leading up to the finale, I decided for this week what I'm going to do is cover my 2 favorite sequels in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series. One, pay homage to the character that made it from day 1 all the way to the end. And also, I wanted to give a decent send-off here. So before we dive into my first of the 2 favorite sequels of that, I just want to take a moment and personally thank each and every one of you that have shared, liked, subscribed, anything that has to do with Codename Scream. I just want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. I went into this in the beginning of January, did not know what to do. I've got guidance along the way, obviously, throughout this on the side, and I think Goat and Sky again for that. They are huge with helping me with this as well, and really not launching me from the ground up. We started with this with 7 weeks at the end of 2020 and came in swinging out of the gates. But I just want to thank each and every one of you for everything. Anyone who's bought a shirt as well, you name it, whatever you've done to support me. Thank you so much. Without you guys, this whole entire thing wouldn't be possible. And it was due to your guys' discussions as why we are going to bring Mel in full-time as well. So, starting next week, not only do we have Mel, and we're going to be back at Studio B because the renovations are ready, and her and I are going to be back to our old black backdrop. We're no longer going to be here. We're going to cover all of the Halloween films that I have not touched base on in With That Being Said to this point. So there's still a whole bunch of movies, and how better to start a new series than with the co-host that also loves Michael Myers as much as I do. So start off, let's go ahead. My first of 2 of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequels of the favorites is 1986 Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. This one I felt like was the closest we could ever get to the original. We still had Tobe Hooper in place directing. It was written by L.M. Kit Carson, and it was produced by Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus. And this movie had a lot of backlash when it was released, even from the distributor company Canon releasing. They did not like what they had as a product here. They were expecting a straight-up horror film just like the original. And what they received was a black comedy. It's still considered a horror film, but at the end of the day, it's a black comedy. It is dark as hell, It's great, though, nonetheless. The thing I appreciated most about this movie, not only the fact that we still had Tobe Hooper, who was the entire reason that the original even existed, we got Bill Moseley. And the reason Bill Moseley was even involved with this is right after Texas Chainsaw Massacre in '74. He had shot just like a fan appreciation film called the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and he played a version of the Hitchhiker in that. And he ended up showing that to people that were involved with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Tobe Hooper even said, if I ever do a sequel, you'll be involved. So he was one of the first calls to come on board and play Chop Top. And Chop Top is one of the most underrated horror characters, I feel like, pretty much ever. But so this movie was released August 22nd of 1986, shot on a $4.5 million budget. It only grossed $8 million in the US, so not a lot of money made. Again, that has to do in part with the mixed reviews from fans as well as the critic side of things. If you were to adjust that for 2021 inflation, you're only looking at about 19.1, just shy of $19.2 million. Not a lot of money coming here. This one has garnered more of cult status at the end of the day. But the film, the thing I appreciate about it, Dennis Hopper was in there, who played Lefty. Lefty was a former Texas Ranger and is related to Sally and Franklin Hardesty, victims from the first film. Because Sally, they discuss in the opening scroll, just like they did in the beginning of the first one, that, Sally has passed away. And Franklin obviously got chainsawed to death in the first one. And so he's always been wanting to avenge their deaths. He knows, he has an idea of who's done it. But this film follows him trying to go and track the family down. And we start off the film with two high school guys driving out on a Texas highway, going out to a football game. And they are harassing Stretch, a local DJ on the radio, played by Carolyn Williams, phenomenal horror actress. But because she can't hang up because of stipulations with the station, they just continue to harass her, and she keeps this line open. While they're passing a pickup truck, pops out Leatherface and rips up the roof of their car with his chainsaw, kills the one, and then it causes the car to crash, killing the other guy. A little bit later, that's when we're introduced to Lefty, and he is investigating these murders and notices the chainsaw marks. And he's starting to put two and two together that, oh, these are the same family involved. And they're involved with my niece and nephew's disappearances. And the cook, Drayton Sawyer, the head of the family, Jim Sido, phenomenal actor, came back to reprise the role. He is now going off to different chili cook-offs in the South and winning. And it's disgusting when you think about it, because we know exactly what's in that meat. And he even says in his win at this current one at the Texas-Oklahoma chili cook-off, and they even asked, like, what's the secret? And he says, I have an eye for prime meat. And that's just, that's part of that dark humor side of things. It's gross, nonetheless. And so then Lefty ends up meeting up with Stretch and asks her to perform play tape of the murder happening. Because keep in mind, she was on the phone with the two when they got chainsawed. So it got played on the air the night before. He wants them to keep playing it regularly on the hour because he's trying to bring this family out. Well, it works. Drayton Sawyer is angry that this is happening, and he sends the family out to the radio station, which is when we get introduced to Chop Top. Chop Top is just disgusting. He ends up just completely just eviscerating her producer on the right there in the studio. Skins him alive on top of it. It was gross. It was really hardcore and hard to watch at first. Leatherface comes in to try and kill Stretch. She somehow, I guess, woos him, if you would. It was a really one of multiple uncomfortable sequences involving Stretch and Leatherface that have a lot of sexual undertones that were just very uncomfortable to watch. And he convinces Chop Top that he's killed her. They move on. They take LG, who is the producer that they have killed, back to their house. And they live in an abandoned carnival grounds. Way different from the house that we were introduced to in '74. It's a little bit of a difference there that I wasn't a fan of necessarily. And Lefty, who followed them, all the way along, shows up with a bunch of chainsaws and just starts trashing the house. He's cutting down support beams, screaming all about Jesus and all these different religious things. It was, that whole entire thing was just him screaming a lot and him chainsawing things a lot. That part was a little just overdone after a while when they would cut over to him just trashing the place left and right. Stretch ends up following them out there, and we get to uncomfortable sequence number 2 between her and Leatherface. And he takes the face of her producer, puts it on her, puts his hat on her, and then runs away. And turns out that guy's not actually completely dead. He's still somewhat alive. Now he's faceless, just a mess. Helps her escape. That's when Chop Top realizes, oh, hey, no, he's not dead. And starts a whole family turmoil thing. We end up getting to the grand finale here where Lefty ends up chainsawing the cook and getting into a chainsaw battle with Leatherface, which is hilarious when you think about it and you watch it. And they're having it's like a sword battle with chainsaws. It's hilarious. It's over the top. And Drayton, the cook, ends up taking out a grenade, and he ends up blowing up the whole floor they're on, which takes out him, Leatherface, and Lefty, and the grandfather figure. Because there was a brief moment where they were torturing Stretch, and it was very reminiscent to 74 with Sally. And that part was kind of cool because it was a nod back to the original, and I did appreciate that quite a bit. And then Chop Top follows Stretch up to the top of a tower. She grabs a chainsaw she finds on the corpse of the family's grandmother, and it's like a shrine. It was almost kind of like reminiscent of Psycho, where there's like a shrine of the dead mother. And she takes this chainsaw, fatally saws Chop Top. He falls down to the tower to his death. And then we get another nod to the original where Stretch is screaming, swinging the chainsaw in the sun. And then the film ends. The one thing about this film, they did not get Gunnar Hansen involved to play Leatherface for the second one. There has been multiple conflicting stories as to why he wasn't involved. Some of it was due to pay, some of it was behind the scenes things he didn't agree with. There's no really confirmed story. The one that they kind of stuck with for the documentaries in regards to the film was the fact that he was just not satisfied with the pay with his agent at the time. So unfortunately, they couldn't get him back on. And I felt that took a lot of the characterization of what Leatherface was with someone else. Another thing about the film that was kind of dissatisfying in a way was, and no offense, Tom Savini is a mastermind. He is amazing special effects work. He's been involved in so many different iconic horror films, and his work is, bar none. But it's not necessarily his work with this film that I didn't appreciate. It's the fact that it was Tom Savini's work to make it look like, dead skin and whatnot. And for this, it definitely looked like Tom Savini. It didn't look like a real face cut off of somebody and put on Leatherface. Very well thought out, very well done, but it just didn't feel real and gritty like 74 was. So that was one takeaway from the film I did not appreciate. But a lot of the homages to the original is one thing I really appreciated about the film. The use of the 80s music, because they used a lot of more modern music in multiple sequences. That was another thing I appreciated. They were able to modernize, at the time, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, there was still a score done by Tobe Hooper in this, just like in the first one. So there's a lot of weird, ambient, creepy undertone music going, but they were still able to stay with the times and stay relevant at that time. There are a ton of deleted scenes in the film that they actually had to cut out just to get the pacing issues that were in the film there knocked out. Those turned up in the 2007 Gruesome Edition DVD, which is the copy I personally own. And that also has conversations with Tobe Hooper, with behind-the-scenes stuff, Tom Savini. Fantastic version of that release. It's my absolute favorite. Not even just the fact that I own just that one, but you don't get those in the other releases that to this point. The film was only released theatrically in the States in 1986 on August 22nd. It promptly got an X rating when it was submitted to the MPAA. They actually used that as part of the selling point for the film. They even said, due to the nature of this film, no one under 17 will be admitted. So they were able to use that and spin it to a degree, which was kind of cool. As I mentioned, had mixed reviews across the board between horror fans, critics galore. It only holds a 47% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes as it stands currently. On the controversy side of things, not only was it mixed reviews across the board, this film, just like its predecessor, was banned in multiple countries upon release. It's banned for over 20 years in Australia alone. There were retailers in 1987 that actually were selling the VHS, and the box was even proudly stating that it was illegal in the country and whatnot. And down the line, the retailers were caught and by federal customs agents and whatnot. And this film didn't get an official release until November 30th of 2006. And then the Gruesome Edition DVD that I spoke of momentarily did come up in January 24th in Australia. It was also banned in Germany and Singapore until certain cuts were made. In Germany, it got the an R18 rating, so similar to our just standard R. And then in Singapore, it gave them the R21 rating, which is similar to R, but it's restricted to anyone under 21. In the United Kingdom, they attempted to release the film, but the BBFC did notify Canon that they had to cut at least 20 to 25 minutes off the film in order to give them the R18 rating that they were looking for. Multiple passes between the two of them, it never actually went through. So this film, went through just as much difficulty as the original, if not more so. And we've since then just had a multitude of releases of this. Most recently, Scream Factory did a collector's edition Blu-ray on April 19th, 2016. There was a set sequel to try and be made with Tobe Hooper's son, William. They were going to call it All-American Massacre. And it was going to be both a sequel and a prequel to Chainsaw Massacre 2. He unfortunately ran out of funds for post-production in 2000. It was never completed or released, but there was a trailer leaked in the early 2000s briefly for this film. So that's why we only got the next film, which was Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, which is my favorite sequel, and we will be talking about on Thursday. So what did you guys think about this film? Sound off in the comments below. Send me a message on Instagram, Twitter. You can email me. You can also now message us on Facebook. Look for us on Facebook as well. We just launched that. You can message us on there now too as well, or comment. Do whatever you need to do. Let's talk about this movie a little bit more, and what you did like if you did, and what you didn't like if you just didn't like it in general. Let's just talk about it. Let's have some fun, right? So with that being said, scare you later, YouTube.